Sure. A report by McKinsey, a global advisory firm, shows that family businesses contribute a whopping 70% to the global gross domestic product. In another report published this year, KPMG says that family businesses are the backbone of economies worldwide, as the influence of family-owned businesses becomes even greater in the 21st century. So let's bring on my guests to discuss family businesses in Nigeria from a sustainable wealth creation approach. Kemi Ojenike is the Chief Operations Officer at Meristem Family Office here in Lagos. Great to have you again on the show tonight. It's been quite some time.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Let's get this global picture, because when I saw the report from McKinsey, and that was like, wow, 70% of global GDP in family businesses. That's quite huge. Talk to me about that. How important is this to have 70% of the global GDP size?
Essentially, family businesses are at the core of our economy. Most of the thriving businesses, the sources of employment world over, not Nigeria alone, are tied to family businesses. Because typically these businesses are known to be resilient, They are created to be long-standing, right? With the commitment of the founders, the family members. But unfortunately, what we've seen is that many of these businesses do not live up to their full potential. More often than not, these businesses end up dying with the founders, particularly in this region.
In this part of the world.
In this part of the world. And many times we underestimate the influence and the impact of that. Many times we often see it, another business bites the dust, but we don't realize the ripple effect on our economy. We don't realize the effect on the families themselves, on employment, on education, on the wide ecosystem of individuals and families that are tied to that single enterprise. And so now more than ever, it has become extremely crucial for us to focus very carefully on the sustainability of family businesses and why the failure of these enterprises seem to be so predominant. It's important for us to begin to look at it critically, because more often than not, it is not for the reasons that we think it is.
It is. So any idea of the size of family-owned businesses in Nigeria? I'm sure when we talk about globally, there are a couple of names: the Cadburys, the Guinness,
yes,
and the rest, Coca-Cola, and a couple of other brands in Europe as well will come up with a lot of names. And then you go to Asia, for example, in automobile,
yes,
the Samsung family, for example. So these are multi-billion, multi-trillion-dollar enterprises. So what's the size? Do we have any idea in Nigeria how they impact on the growth of the economy here?
Right. Well, in Nigeria, the numbers sort of mirror the global numbers. And I know it's a bit hard to believe.
It's very hard for me to believe.
Honestly, more than 50% of businesses in Nigeria are family-owned or family-linked. The key problem we have is that we have a proliferation of effort. So what ends up happening is some of the brands, the established names that we're aware of in our early years, we don't see them anymore.
Yes.
And what you have is new families creating new businesses, enterprises, unfortunately, many times for survival. But the truth remains that family businesses are at the core of our economy, are at the core of enterprise and entrepreneurship in Nigeria. The problem is, like I said before, that there is no compounding of effort. So what typically happens is that you hear of a family, an industrial one that has set up businesses, that thrived in the 80s, in the 90s.
In the 60s.
In the 60s. And they're nowhere to be found. They're sort of redundant now. And then we lose out on the benefit of what could have happened if those businesses were sustained, if the effort was combined with technology and today's advancement, and just how far-reaching the impact could have been. But what ends up happening is those businesses are shut down. We don't hear about them anymore, and we have new enterprises emerging, also facing the same challenge of continuity.
So what's the role of intangible assets, therefore, in sustaining family wealth beyond the first generation?
Honestly, Bosin, many times we assume that the reason why wealth and family businesses and enterprise fails is due to financial reasons. The first thing that comes to mind is a lack of funding. But research has shown that the real reason why wealth transfer fails, and by extension, businesses are not successfully transited across generations, is not for financial reasons. It's usually for a lack of focus and nurturing of intangible assets. There's a study that...
Break that down for me.
Absolutely.
A little bit.
So typically, when we're thinking growth, when we're thinking business, we're thinking naira and kobo. We're thinking money, tangibles, measurable.
Yes.
Those
Financial,
things,
fiscal
financial.
assets.
But those things that are not as tangible and measurable
As
in
land,
numbers,
as machinery.
we completely ignore. And the truth is that those things actually significantly influence financial assets. And I'll give you an example. Human capital, the people that are responsible for decision making, if they are not whole, they are not equipped, they are not well, they do not have the skills, the technical and the soft skills, they will lose the money. It's quite a simple connection. Values, you think about it, even in the corporate world, the organizations that thrive are the ones that maintain certain principles and processes. Those processes are intangible assets.
Yeah.
But
you can touch them,
absolutely,
as it were.
you can't touch them, but they determine what happens to your tangible assets. Research has told us that businesses and families that nurture intangible assets are 3 times more likely to sustain wealth over time, to achieve lasting wealth than those that don't. And so what ends up happening is that we're so focused on the money that we do not spend time, we do not strategize around other forms of assets.
Of capital.
And what ends up happening is that even the money becomes lost.
So human capital, and that goes to issues around the fundamentals of succession planning.
Yes.
And good governance.
Absolutely.
Because again, the world is changing.
Absolutely.
Global economy is structure and all that, trade, whatever is changing. So it's no longer business as usual. So what strategies are you looking at, for example, at Meristem Security? If you're talking, I'm sure you've sat down with a number of folks who are deep pockets in Nigeria about succession planning, talking to them about good governance and why they need not to focus not just on brick and mortars, but these intangible assets.
Absolutely. So within the Meristem Family Office, our core is to help families identify what their biggest pain points are and where they should be focusing their energies on. So it goes without saying that many of these accomplished families, they have money, but they can tell that money is not the problem. The concern of the founder, the patriarch, the matriarch goes beyond how can the asset continue to grow. It becomes how can this asset be sustained? And so when we're talking of human capital, many times what immediately comes to mind is an heir, a child to take over from the father, from the mother. But what we've seen, and with the evolution of time and culture, is that many times these heirs are removed from the family business. They've set up their lives in other jurisdictions.
They enjoy the money.
They do.
But mentally speaking,
they are not connected.
They're not connected.
And you can't really blame them because there was no system of preparation. Many times what happens is we wait until they are adults and preparation becomes an event. Call them, sit with them in your lawyer's office and tell them this business now belongs to you. But that feels tragic.
And it's like, wow, are you sure I really belong
Exactly.
here, Mom?
I'm not interested in this. I have other interests. How does my interest align with this? So what we tell our clients in the family office is you need to be very deliberate and strategic about preparation. The same
How
energy,
early do you think that should start?
honestly, as early as possible. That's another mistake that many families make. We think we want to begin the thought process and the activities around legacy when we are much older, when we've achieved certain financial milestones.
70, 80, and almost at the departure lounge.
But typically, at that point, what you're really doing is damage control. Because the damage has been done. There's only so much you can do. There's only so much influence you can have on an individual that is formed, whose worldviews are already set, whose interests are set. So the earlier, the better. As early as when children are still young, as early as when they are impressionable, those are the times that you begin to set the building blocks.
So succession plan isn't that, when he gets to 40 or when she gets married or when he becomes a father?
Absolutely not. The earlier, the better. That's too late. But then better late than never.
Better late than ever. So what are you seeing in Nigeria in terms of this sustainable wealth in Nigeria? Do you think culture, for example, things like, I want a boy I want a male child to be the successor, not a female child. I'm sure you've come across that.
Absolutely. Thankfully, what we are seeing is that many accomplished families in Nigeria are beginning to see that the old models do not work. The model of the traditional way of thinking, of placing an expectation or a burden on a child because of their gender. That child, whether or not they have the skill set or the interest. And so we are seeing an expansion of mindset. And it's not to say that within our cultural context, there are not elements of it that are still useful, but we are seeing the need to think broadly, to think beyond this is what I want to this is what this family and business needs to thrive. And so we are seeing families opening up their minds a lot more to programs that actually prepare their children, accepting the fact that their direct heirs may not be the next in line to take over from the business, and that's perfectly fine. As long as the business is well structured, as long as the business is thriving in the hands of the right professionals.
So not necessarily the son or the daughter being the first to take over.
Absolutely
could be
not.
an interim CEO or whatever.
No, they can be a part of the business, but not necessarily in
They
that
want the
capacity of leadership. Absolutely. There are many creative ways that they can contribute to the success of the family enterprise without the pressure of taking on the role that they are not prepared for.
They were not prepared for.
Absolutely.
So we can see example of that around us.
Oh, yes.
How can't we? Without naming names.
Without naming names.
Without naming names.
But we're making progress. One thing that we can see in Nigeria is that we're making progress. A lot more people can see that the old method is not working. And that's why we are here at the family office, to support families to achieve their goals and sustain their peace of mind when it comes to the future of
I'm
their
going to
family.
think about it. Bring the boys in and sit down around your
That'll
table.
be fantastic. Looking forward to that.
But I'm sure there's no size to that. It doesn't have to be multi-billion. It could be just a small business.
Absolutely.
If we can afford the fees.
The earlier the better.
No response to that. Hold that as a takeaway. Thank you so much as always.
Thank you for
your time.
having me.
I appreciate those insights on wealth creation, insight from family business perspective. Have a pleasant evening. Kemi Ojenike, the Chief Operations Officer at Meristem Family Office.